welcome back to Desperate Living, Cultural Chaos, Forgotten Stories. And today we're on part 3, the third and hopefully the final part of our look at books about censorship and obscenity. And we have a whopping pile of books here, 9 in total, so let's not waste any more time and let's crack on and look at what we have. So first of all, we're going to look at 2 different books with the same title, to Deprave and Corrupt. This first one is probably the more interesting. It's from 1962, when obscenity in Britain was quite in the news. There's a bit of fluff there. Having shortly after the Lady Chatterley trial, and it's a series of essays from various people. So yeah, there are some interesting people writing in this book. Lord Longford, who would later become the BBFC president for a while. Maurice Grotius, who was the publisher of Olympia Press. Norman St. John Stevens, the Tory MP. So quite a few interesting characters, really edited by John Chandos, and it's, as you might expect, a very interesting, conflicting book, in the sense that there are lots of different opinions expressed here, as a collection of essays rather than a single piece. But it's definitely good, it's definitely interesting, obviously very, very dated these days, but certainly, you know, quite a good study of the state of the art, I suppose we could say, at the beginning of the 1960s. So, yeah, very nice. The second, To Deprave and Corrupt, by Alan Burns, barrister at law, is kind of less fun, to be honest. It's more of an academic study. This one's from 1972, and of course was immediately dated. There's no reference here, for instance, to Deep Throat, that came out that same year, and really, we could argue, changed the whole argument around obscenity and censorship. So yeah, it's interesting for what it is. It's you know, a good in-depth study of where things were legally, morally. It's a bit po-faced, and certainly it's one of those books that sells itself on the subject matter that then it is rather snooty about. But anyway, it's certainly worth having. But of the two, To Deprave and Corrupt, this is the least interesting of them. Fascinating for very different reasons is The Dirty Squad by Michael Hames, who was the head of the Obscene Publications branch and was some kind of anti-porn evangelist for a long time. A man who, I'll watch my words here, but you know, it didn't seem like he was too bright, and certainly was not exactly somebody who had any respect for sexual freedom. He was also a bit of a self-publicist, it has to be said. You can see he was involved in various dreadful cases, like Operation Spanner. But there he is with Esther Anton and Roger Cook, getting married with Spike Milligan as his best man, which is interesting in many, many ways. So this is, as you would expect, a very self-congratulatory book that you would need to read between the lines on continually, but Hames went from the Obscene Publication Squad, and once he was gone, things really started to settle down a bit. I mean, so this book was published in 2000, after he'd left, and it's already, by that point, in 2000, we already had legal hardcore in Britain. So this feels like the memoirs of a wasted life. Speaking of memoirs of wasted lives, Mary Whitehouse. Who does she think she is? Well, quite. Published by New English Library, which is rather funny because they were publishers of the sort of salacious literature that I'm sure she deeply disapproved of. This is from 1971, and yeah, let's not labour on this too much. It's full of, again, self-congratulatory and rather questionable stories. Mary Whitehouse was somebody who was always happy to take credit for things that other people had actually done, and this is certainly no different. Whitehouse, of course, would love to call herself just like an ordinary housewife. She wasn't some kind of self-publicist, but of course she was. I mean, she loved appearing on TV. She loved appearing in the press. She was very media savvy, and always wrong, it has to be said. Don't let anybody tell you, as they like to do, that, oh, Mary was right, maybe she was right, maybe she had a point, given our currently over-sexualized society. Well, no, she was always wrong about everything. She picked the wrong targets, and she was just in it for, well, I would say she was just in it for personal attention, but she was certainly in it for the glory as much as anything else. And yeah, she was an idiot. And here's another of her autobiographies. You might wonder why she would need to write so many. I mean, I think I'm missing one, so quite contrary. This one was published in 1993, so 22 years after the previous one. I think there is one in the middle. And what's interesting here, apart from that it's a much more populist looking book, because here we go with photographs, all very self-congratulatory. There she is with Cliff Richard. There she is with James Anderton. There she is with Margaret Thatcher. Well, we can question all of this. And doing all her TV appearances. Apparently she was only an ordinary housewife, but there she is appearing on the Noel Edmonds show. So yeah, she's clearly somebody who just relished attention and relished telling other people how to live. She was extremely Christian, so her attitudes were dominated by religion, by the Church of England style of religion. I don't think she had much respect for any other kinds. So Christian morality, and let's remember, she was deeply homophobic. She was, arguably somewhat racist. She was just a fairly horrible character, and nobody should try to rehabilitate her, because it's a stupid idea and a dangerous one, I have to say. I mean, this book, and This Filth, Letters from the Mary Whitehouse Archive, is essentially a bit of a kind of humorous book. It's looking at the kind of letters that Whitehouse was sent from members of the public, published in 2012, and a lot of these are quite hilarious. I mean, it's letters that she wrote, letters that she received. Whitehouse was, of course, somebody who would continually write letters of complaint to people. So these are letters coming from the BBC in response. It's obviously very interesting in terms of the level of hysteria. There you go. Look, there's a reference to Tony Palmer, who we talked about in our last look at censorship books and his documentaries. But yes, so as I was saying, this is a very interesting study of some of the wacky beliefs that people had, the things that people were offended by for no good reason. Things that the vast majority of TV viewers would not have even noticed. People who were interested in Whitehouse and her campaign would sit. So I mean, look at this. This is a classic example. The Sweeney, 1988. So it's not even the original run of the Sweeney, but listing all the outrageous language, which most of us would not even. Stupid mare, really, playing silly buggers, bleeding fiddler's elbow. Yeah, this is hardly the most extreme language you could think of. But this is the kind of thing they did. They would look at these films and TV shows and list outrageous content. Of course, there's more photos here. Whitehouse and her various campaigns. There's Whitehouse again with Cliff Richard. We don't, unfortunately, have any pictures of Whitehouse with one of her great supporters of her moral campaigns, Jimmy Savile, but that would probably just be too good of a gotcha, wouldn't it? But anyway, this book, for the most part, is gently mocking of the whole moral panic. But again, it does rather conclude with the idea that maybe Mary Whitehouse had a point. Maybe she was a little bit mistreated by the media and the press and public opinion. But of course she wasn't. Mary Whitehouse was somebody who campaigned against all levels of sexual freedom. It wasn't anything just to do with films, with TV. She was somebody who would have been opposed to things like contraception, certainly for people who weren't married, sex before marriage, any kind of sexual kink. So yeah, she's a bad egg, shall we say, and let's not talk of her anymore for now. Speaking of bad eggs, and of course Mary Whitehouse, this is pornography, the Longford Report, Lord Longford's notorious examination of porn, where he would, this is from 1972, and if we look at the list of members here of his committee, which had, of course, no academic or legal standing, but there's Peregrine Worsthorne, Kingsley Amos, Malcolm Muggeridge. So this is a big, heavy, and often hilarious, totally one-sided look at the dangers of pornography in its widest sense. I mean, we're talking everything from softcore films playing in British cinemas through to the kind of live shows in Denmark that I can't even describe. He went over to Denmark to check out what was going on over there. Of course he did, and went to a live show where he was then accosted by a naked young woman with a whip, and in front of various journalists who of course had gone with him and also felt the need to go and take in one of these live shows, which I think essentially turned this whole thing into a bit of a farce, a bit of a joke. Even people who were perhaps a bit sympathetic to him just thought that this was a bit silly in the end, and he made himself look a fool. Lord Longford, of course, when he wasn't trying to ban all levels of adult entertainment, was a great supporter of Myra Hindley. And, you know, I'm not condemning him for his commitment to penal reform and the idea that some criminals might be able to become useful members of society again, but quite frankly, he really picked the wrong person there. Now, looking at something a little different, this is a much more recent book, and one that you might have a bit more difficulty getting hold of. I actually bought this directly from the publishers telos.co.uk, so look them up if you can. I mean, it seemed like it was out of print when I was looking for it, because it was published in 2004, but I only bought this a few years ago. Anyway, The Trials of Hank Janson by Steve Holland. Hank Janson, for those of you unfamiliar with his work, was a great British pulp author who ground out salacious detective novels. I mean, here you can see some of the fantastic covers. These are all, I've read quite a few of Janson's books, and yeah, they're hugely entertaining, gloriously trashy, and, you know, as sleazy as can be allowed in the time. And we're talking like books published sort of 1940s, 50s. I mean, some of these are kind of later editions, but certainly, you know, you can imagine why these would cause problems. And yeah, he was a bit of a coarse celeb when his books were taken to trial. He was found guilty of obscenity because, of course, he had his own publishing outlet as well. He wasn't just the author. And he was, yeah, a pioneering writer. You can still buy his books fairly easily. Not perhaps cheaply. Hank Janson wasn't the author's real name, and he published, you know, under various names. I think we have, yeah. So there's a list of destruction orders. What are the great things about British obscenity law is that they can just have, magistrates cannot give orders for books to be destroyed rather than actually put them on trial and have them viewed by a jury, which always felt a bit dodgy. So yes, Stephen D. Francis is who Hank Janson really was. I mean, is it Janson? I don't know. I'm sure an expert can tell me. Anyway, if you get a chance to pick this up, like as I say, go online, look for the publisher. They certainly, you know, didn't have any problems getting hold of this, and it's a very entertaining read. A kind of censorship story that a lot of people are unaware of. Even those who are aware of Hank Janson's books probably don't know the whole controversy and the whole story, and it's a really fascinating tale. And let's wind up with Turmoil in the Toybox by Phil Phillips. There's Phil Phillips. In case you can't guess, he's a religious gentleman, and he is very concerned about the dangers of children's cartoons and toys. Satanic toys like He-Man, Barbie, Rainbow Bright, G.I. Joe, Smurfs, Dungeons and Dragons, Care Bears, Thundercats, E.T., Cabbage Patch Dolls. You might wonder what on earth he's talking about. This is from Starburst Publishers, not to be confused, of course, with Starburst magazine, the science fiction magazine from Britain. But, yeah, so this was published in 1986, and as you can see, my copy has been very heavily consulted by its original owner. I bought this second-hand, and somebody has clearly taken this book worryingly seriously, because it is very much insane, as you can imagine. Here are some details. For instance, underneath the cuteness of the Smurfs is a cartoon laden with the occult. Well,
Smurfs. Is there anything occultic or dangerous about Smurfs?
Well, Smurfs happens to be the most popular Saturday morning cartoon since the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner hour. It's just entered into a long-term run, and it's hit an hour and a half on Saturday morning cartoons. But there are some things about Smurfs that we need to look at. First of all, you'll notice that they're depicted as blue with black lips.
Well, isn't that interesting?
And you know what happens to you when you die? You turn blue and your lips turn black.
In other words, these are depictive of dead creatures.
Right. And another thing is that Smurfs is an all-male community. And you say, oh, there's Smurfette. She's a female. Well, in one cartoon, she was depicted as transforming from a male to a female through magical power. And so the only female in the Smurfs is transformed from a male. She was not born a female.
No, what you're telling me then is that even Smurfs carry a homosexual connotation in that most of them are male.
If you say so, sir. So, somebody's yellow marker pen must have run out by the time they got to this, or maybe two people have been consulting this, who knows. Anyway, it goes into detail about complete nonsense, essentially. Anything magical, anything entertaining, anything that isn't essentially Christian is dismissed as being evil, satanic, corrupting the minds of children. Some of us might say that people like this, with their weird minds, are far more damaging to kids than... Oh, there's another bookmark. Far more damaging to kids than any of these cartoons that he's allegedly exposing. Of course, there are documentaries from Jeremiah Films covering this whole subject with Phil Phillips himself, and there you go. Look, you can see Deception of a Generation, Spiritual Warfare, an expose on Dungeons and Dragons. So, yeah, this will tell you a great deal that you didn't know. None of it true, but let's not, let's not pick hairs. And of course, we'll be continuing to guide you through some of the other eccentric and unusual books in our book collection over the next weeks and months, and however long it takes to go through all this stuff. So, as ever, if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure that you've subscribed, make sure that you like, and click the alert buttons. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.